What if I told you that everything we thought about Ferrari's failure in 2025 was false? That the real problem of SF-25 was not the car, but the way they understood it? And what Hamilton has just discovered it alone, without the help of the team? This could be the most unexpected turn of the year. The expectation was low. The Italian, fast and low-load layout was not considered the ideal environment for a deep technical evaluation. However, in the midst of what should be a routine race, the Ferrari Telemetry Center detected an anomaly. Hamilton's SF-25 data made no sense. For the first time throughout the year, the car had produced a clean session, without irregularities in longitudinal stability. The system did not detect cargo losses in braking, or aggressive inputs of the steering wheel, or lateral transfers outside the range. The telemetry of Tour 27 was especially revealing. Hamilton had taken Lesmo 2 with a fluidity and speed that not only exceeded his partner Leclerc, but also the McLaren, who had been the aerodynamic reference of the year. The graphics showed a linear braking curve without oscillations, and the most impressive, a perfect sequence of inputs to the accelerator and brake, as if they had been generated by an AI program to optimize driving. The SF-25, which until then looked like a temperamental machine, responded with almost surgical precision. And all without relevant modifications in the setup. The data did not square with any previous simulation. In the operations center, Frédéric Vasseur himself was forced to stop a technical meeting to review the records. No one could believe what I was seeing. The car had not transformed. It was the same SF-25 that had disappointed career after career. The only thing that had changed was the pilot, or rather, the way the pilot was interpreting it. This finding questioned all the previous conclusions on the car. What if the car was never bad? What if the problem was that everyone was trying to drive it as a traditional car, without adapting to its specific nature? Hamilton had not only driven it, I had read it. In Monza, it was not Ferrari who saved his season, it was Hamilton who, silently, wrote a new chapter of what a modern F1 means. This discovery was not just a momentary improvement. It was the beginning of a complete technical redefinition. What the data revealed in raw was in truth that Ferrari had ignored for months. That you do not need a new chassis to transform a car. Sometimes you need a pilot capable of resetting your instinct, unlearning what you learn, and reconstructing in real time. And that, precisely, was what happened in Monza. The finding in Monza was only the surface. What came later revealed an even deeper story, one that escapes the usual understanding between pilot and machine. When Ferrari's technical team began to analyze in detail how Hamilton had managed to tame SF-25, what they found was a total redefinition of the relationship between driver and car. Lewis had not only achieved a clean turn, he had developed a new way of driving, and the most shocking, he did it without external guide, without simulations, without previous data that indicated it as the right path. For weeks, Ferrari had tried to solve the instability of the car with engineering solutions, aerodynamic packages, suspension configurations, mapping settings in the ERS system. All attempts failed when they were with the same wall. The SF-25 responded erratically to inputs that in other cars generated predictable responses. Design philosophy seemed incompatible with the way the pilots were trying to drive it. And that was where Hamilton did the unthinkable. He ignored the solutions of the technical department and looked for answers in his own instinct. The first change was in braking. While Leclerc continued to fight with a hyperactive front that did not offer confidence in the entrance to curve, Hamilton began to vary his transition between accelerator and brake. Instead of stopping late and deep, as is customary in the modern style of F1, it began to apply a progressive, more anticipated and less aggressive pressure, thus reducing the weight transferred suddenly to the front axle. This technique generated less compression in the elements of the suspension and therefore prevented the aerodynamics of the car from being destabilized by sudden changes in the chassis height. The thermal sensors on the brake discs revealed a fundamental clue. The heat generated by Hamilton was minor, not to stop less, but to stop better. Its energy layout was more efficient. Every centimeter of the track was used with surgical precision, and the car responded as if it had been adjusted only for him. This reality was uncomfortable for many within Ferrari. It meant that the entire database used so far to configure the car had been badly oriented. That predictive models were useless if the pilot was not able to synchronize with the internal logic of chassis. Hamilton, with his experience and sensitivity, had accessed that logic intuitively. And then the inevitable became evident. The SF-25 did not need a technical review. I needed a new way of being piloted. And that new form could not be taught. Because what Hamilton had done in Monza was not replicable from manuals or simulators. It was an individual discovery process, deeply connected to the pilot's sensory perception. It was driving from mechanical empathy, something that very few in the history of sport have achieved. For the first time in the modern hybrid era, an investment of roles was given. It was the pilot who educated the car, and not vice versa. What Ferrari found in Monza was not a technical improvement to apply in the rest of the season. It was an uncomfortable revelation that forced the team to question its entire development process. Although the car had finally shown stable performance, engineers knew it was not thanks to a new piece, nor to an evolution of chassis or a software improvement. It was an extraordinary circumstance caused by a single factor: Hamilton. This finding, far from being a solution, presented the conceptual fragility of the Ferrari project. The SF-25 did not improve. He simply stopped fighting his pilot because his pilot had stopped fighting him. That is a fundamental difference. What Monza offered was a simulation of success. A technical mirage that, misunderstood, could make Ferrari believe to have solved his base problem. But it was not so, and it is precisely at that point where the most significant internal conflict arises. Inside, Maranello began to face two positions. On the one hand, there were those who saw in Hamilton an opportunity to completely redefine the way of understanding the car. Its human, adaptive approach could be the key to exploiting the SF-25 in its current state without drastic redesign. On the other hand, some technical sectors of the team resisted accepting that a solution was not in hard data, but in the instinct of a pilot. Because accepting that would imply admitting that engineering, at least in this case, was overcome by intuition. This debate became urgent, because Ferrari had to make a strategic decision for the rest of the championship. Should they redesign car elements to adapt it to the style of Leclerc, who still couldn't replicate what was done by Hamilton? Or should they force the full team to adopt the new driving approach that Hamilton had developed intuitively? Dissonance is not only internal. The modern Formula One is built on the premise that the data is everything. AI, digital twins, CFD simulations, virtual wind tunnels. And yet, here there was a pilot who, without any new parameter, had made a failed car behave like a winning car. This not only shakes Ferrari's internal structures, but also launches a question open to the rest of the paddock. How much of what we consider bad in an F1 car is really the fault of the car, and how much is a lack of connection between the machine and its operator? In addition, this discovery puts Lewis Hamilton again at the center of conversation, but not like the 7-time world champion that seeks his last great victory. Now it is for a different reason. In his first year with Ferrari, he has achieved something that goes beyond results. It has triggered a philosophical reflection within the team on how to build, interpret, and pilot a Formula One car. What happened in Monza with the SF-25 was not a victory or a defeat. It was a moment of clarity. A short, almost imperceptible moment, in which the pieces fit and revealed something that the rest of the paddock has not yet fully understood. Lewis Hamilton, through his experience and sensitivity, managed to interpret a car that even their engineers could not explain. But the real impact of this event is not measured at points, podiums, or statistics. It is measured in what forces to rethink. Ferrari has lived for years under the weight of his own history. A team accustomed to looking for answers in technology, in the millions invested in aerodynamics, simulators, wind tunnels, and data centers. But this time, the solution did not leave the software. He left a synapse between mind and machine. From a pilot who, despite arriving from another structure with another philosophy, was able to abandon his old habits, unlearn what learned, and build a new driving logic from scratch. This rate of change is as rare as it is valuable. Because in an era where everything is quantified, where each decision is backed by spreadsheets, heat maps, and simulation matrices, a pilot once again demonstrated that instinct, sensitivity, intuition still matter. That the human being remains, in some cases, more efficient than the machine. And that, in Formula One, is an act of rebellion. What happened in Monza could mark a before and after in Ferrari. But it could also mean anything if they are not able to extract a background lesson. The question is not whether they can replicate what Hamilton did. The question is whether they are willing to build a culture where that type of adaptation, that type of pilot, that type of deep reading of the car, becomes the norm and not the exception. Because if they are still looking for responses on the surface, ignoring what has already happened in front of their eyes, then they will fall again in the same usual trap, to trust more on the theory than in the truth of the track. Hamilton, at this point in his career, had nothing to demonstrate. But he did it anyway. He showed that even with a limited car, even in the middle of the strategic chaos that still shakes Ferrari, he can still make a difference. Not with pure speed, not with aggressiveness, but with intelligence, with patience, and with an adaptation capacity that very few pilots have demonstrated in the modern history of sport. And now the question moves to the rest of the paddock. If Hamilton can transform a car with its piloting, how many other pilots are ignoring the true potential of their machines? How many are trapped in a way of driving that no longer applies to the new language of Formula One?